So the first talk of the second part of this morning's lecture will be on AI aesthetics, artificial intelligence in music and art. It will be given by Lehmann, and a philosopher and independent author of the book The Digital Revolution of Music, which is already published in German and French. And he also wants me to tell you that it will be released in English really soon. So,
to switch it on. Okay, I assume that the advances in artificial intelligence will lead to the formation of a new aesthetic discipline, which I would like to call AI aesthetics. After the foundation of philosophical aesthetics in the middle of the 18th century, several new aesthetic disciplines have emerged, such as empirical aesthetics, analytical aesthetics, evolutionary aesthetics, and neuroaesthetics. And there has been questions, traditional questions of philosophical aesthetics, like what is beauty and what is aesthetical judgment, and these questions have been reformulated with different methods. So in all this special aesthetics, there is a specific scientific method on the ground, and that's why you can answer these old philosophical questions in a new manner. So, but I think with AI aesthetics, it is different. AI aesthetic or AI is changing not only our understanding of art and music, but also the practice of art and music. I first introduced the term AI aesthetics in the book Aesthetic Experience, which has been published in 2016. And when I wrote the chapter, Aesthetic Experience and AI aesthetics, I could not Google the term and I could not find the term in the library or on a paper. And the chapter on AI aesthetics is part of an discourse analysis of the discourse of aesthetic experience in Germany. So in Germany, we have had for 50 years a discourse on aesthetic experience. This discourse occurred as a critique of Adorno's aesthetic theory. And my argument is that AI aesthetics fundamentally questions the premise of this aesthetic discourse, because this discourse relies on the concept of aesthetics experience as suggested by Kant in his critique of judgment. And Kant defines the notion of the aesthetic judgment and of aesthetic experience by a negation. It's by negation to the sphere of morality and to pure reason. And on the basis of such a notion of aesthetics experience, you cannot explain what you learn if you make an aesthetic experience. But AI aesthetics, on the other hand, implies a notion of aesthetics experience based on learning processes, in that AI today relies heavily on machine learning programs. That was my argument. The term AI aesthetics has two aspects. First of all, there is the technological aspect. It concerns the algorithm, the experiments and applications of artificial intelligence in art, fashion, design, popular music, and art music. And secondly, there is also a philosophical aspect. It concerns the interpretation of the AI phenomena, such as questions. So questions would be, what does it mean if art music is composed by an AI program? The phenomena, together with the reflection about the phenomena, are equally included in this idea of AI aesthetics. In the AI chapter, I refer to the article A Neural Algorithm of Artistic Style, which has been published in 2015. The essay describes an artificial neural network that can learn any artistic style of painting. In the first step, the artificial neural network is trained in a specific style of painting, and in this case, the training data are generated by Van Gogh's famous painting, The Starry Night. In the second step, you can choose any photo, like a portrait or a photo of a landscape, as a new content. And in the third step, this photo can be reproduced in the Van Gogh style. This neural algorithm of artistic style is thus able to separate content and form, and that was not at all obvious that a program can do that. Let me show the three images again in large format. Here you see Vincent van Gogh's The Starry Night from 1889. This is the new image content, the photo of the house facades on the river Neckar in Tübingen. So the research group was or is based in Tübingen. And that's the result, the house facades on the river Neckar in the Van Gogh style. However, this style transformation still has apparent weaknesses, in that the moon appears here in the same place as in The Starry Night by Van Gogh. Here you see the original painting and this painting, this rendering. But of course, and that means that the separation of content and style has not yet entirely completed, but such algorithms can be improved. Here you see a later program version, and you see that the moon is no longer recognizable as a style element. Here I switch between the two versions, and I think this version is more convincing. On the website deepart.io, you can use the AI algorithm to upload your own images and convert them into a new style. Incidentally, you can use any style templates, even templates such as a stone wall. Even moving pictures can be converted with this algorithm into any style of painting. Here is a short video sequence from the Cathedral Square in Freiburg in the aesthetic world of Van Gogh. The American composer David Cope, which you can see here in his studio, developed already 30 years ago the computer program EMI that can compose in any classical music style. EMI is, by the way, an acronym for Experiments in Musical Intelligence. To the surprise of many experts, EMI was already able to compose works in the style of Bach, Mozart, and Beethoven in the 1990s, which also deceived experts in blind tests. So they could not decide whether they listened to a virtual Mozart or to a real Mozart. Here you can hear a short clip from a Bach concerto created with EMI. In my book, The Digital Revolution of Music, a Music Philosophy, you can find a chapter, Virtual Music, about David Cope's life's work. Cope had still prepared the databases for his algorithms by hand. So, for example, he broke all the 371 chorals composed by Bach into beats by hand, and thus allowing the algorithm to generate new Bach chorals from these beat elements. Another weakness of EMI was that she could compose thousands of new compositions from which Cope has had to choose the most artistically valuable for the performance. So the quality judgment was made by a human. But in principle, Cope pioneered AI aesthetics before deep learning gave artificial intelligence a new boost in 2012. Today, Cope's manual work, so to break down the scores into beats, is done internally by deep learning systems. Here's an example of a Bach choral created with the program Deep Bach. You can feed a melody into the algorithm, much like you can feed a photo in the program Deep Art, and then the program will compose a Bach choral with this melody. My last music example is about IVA. IVA is an acronym for Artificial Intelligence Virtual Artist. It is a deep learning system that has been trained with over 30,000 scores of composers in the music history. It can compose sheet music with classical instruments and orchestra. One can define in advance 30 different parameters of the piece to be composed, parameters such as the compositional style, the epoch, the composer, the mood, or the orchestration, and so on. In 2017, the cultural minister of Luxembourg commissioned an orchestra piece from IVA, and a huge orchestra performed the piece with the very ambitious title, "Let's Make It Happen," at the National Day celebration in Luxembourg. The Luxembourg Federation of Authors and Composers complained bitterly and called the commission, quote, "an affront to Luxembourg's composers, a slap in the face of all creative people in the arts." The last music example leads to the second aspect of my talk, the philosophical or reflexive aspect of AI aesthetics. What are the consequences of all these AI programs for the theory and for the praxis of art and music? One consequence we have already seen. Composers for contemporary classical music lose commissions to AI composers. In a first sketch, I would like to present to you 4 hypotheses on AI aesthetics, and I think it would be easy to formulate 10 or 15 such hypotheses, and that would be, for instance, suitable for a research program or for a book project. First, artificial intelligence can perfectly reproduce any artistic style. Of course, this proposition refers to already existing styles. In principle, the performance of artificial neural networks can be increased indefinitely. And that has 2 aspects. As computer performance increases every year, the networks can work with more layers. And the more layers you have, then better a deep learning system can learn. And the second aspect, that you can increase the performance of such a network with more training data. And in this respect, I do not see any limits to create artwork and compositions on the base of an artistic style. 2, a new artistic style can only be created with additional semantic information. Every new artistic style is based on a background philosophy. Pointillism, for instance, relied on the latest 19th century theory of perceptual physiology and the idea of additive color mixing. In order to create a genuinely new style, one needs concepts and ideas that underlie the style or the ism. Even with this wall style, you have to know that the President of the United States wants to build a wall in order to understand the joke. But this wall style is not a true artistic style, a true aesthetic style, because the wall itself has semantic meaning. In other words, the wall is a style template. In other words, the wall as a style template does not allow a real separation from content and style. And this remark is important because with AI aesthetics, anything and everything can be used as a style template, such as dog heads, for instance, and in this case, then dog heads appear everywhere in your picture. 3, the best artworks transcend their styles. Here you see the picture of George Braque, violin and jug. Traditional painting tried to represent an object in the two-dimensional space of a canvas. Analytical cubism, in contrary, tried to overcome the idea of representation by blurring the distinction between the object and the space, and that's why it is difficult to discover the violin and the jug in this painting, because it is partially ambivalent what detail of the painting belongs to the object and what detail belongs to the space or to the background. The exceptional quality of this painting lies in a detail that is easily overlooked. As you can see here, the nail and the book corners stick out of the picture. One could say that these are the last remnants of the traditional conception of painting. Braque's painting is not just a manifestation of analytical cubism, but the picture also reflects its stylistic concept in contrast to traditional painting, a tradition that analytical cubism tries to overcome. And this self-reflection of the style is precisely what makes Violin and Jug an outstanding painting, in my opinion. You can find this analysis of Braque's painting in my book, Gehaltsästhetik. And I mentioned this book because the idea of Gehalt aesthetics is crucial for my last hypothesis on AI aesthetics. For AI aesthetics is pushing art and music into Gehalt aesthetics. The German word Gehaltsästhetik could be translated like content aesthetic, but I rather prefer not to. And content aesthetics reminds me too much of socialist realism when you have a defined meaning and message. So we have two words in German for Inhalt, for content. That is Inhalt and Gehalt. And Gehalt is used usually in the philosophical tradition of Hegel and Adorno. It means it is a content of a poem or an artwork which must be interpreted. So you generate the Gehalt, the content, by an interpretation. And this meaning is important in the name Gehalt aesthetics. The best aesthetic value, the basic aesthetic value of the modern arts is not any longer beauty, like it was the case in the fine arts over centuries. The new aesthetic basic value of the modern arts is newness. That's why classical music is called new music at the beginning of the 20th century. In the epoch of classical modernism, new music was looking for new aesthetic material, and it created several new isms like serialism, spectralism, musique concrète, instrumental, minimalism, and so on. And the idea was that by creating such isms and styles, you created a new aesthetic experience on the basis of new aesthetic materials. That's why we can call this paradigm the paradigm of material aesthetics. But this paradigm of material progress has been exhausted for some time. There is an alternative possible, and the alternative to redefine the notion of newness. So newness cannot only be defined by new material, but also by new Gehalt, by new content. And nowadays, the newness of an artwork is created usually by new content and new Gehalt. I call this paradigm shift, which happens sooner or later in all the arts, a Gehalt aesthetic term. And conceptual art and conceptual music are the turning points here. They work like a catalyst for this paradigm shift. In art music, this shift happened only recently, and the main reason for that is that new music worked with acoustic instrument and was highly institutionalized, and that's why it was bound to an idea of absolute music, of pure instrumental music. And with the digital revolution, you have now, the composers have an interface where they can mix sound with video and with text very easily and create a new type of music, and I call this in contrast to absolute music, relational music, because here you have the relation to what is usually called the extra musical material is part of the composition and part of the notion of music. This paradigm shift took place in the realm of high culture, or reflexive culture, one can say, and a reflexive culture relies on discourse and text production. Contemporary classical music was not affected by a discourse, and it was not affected by the end of material progress, because it was part of the classic music tradition. But if it becomes more and more easy to compose huge orchestral pieces by deep learning systems like IVA, then even the composers of contemporary classical music will be forced to add something to their compositions that the AI composer cannot do. And the solution to that problem is the same solution like it happened in new music. It is a Gehaltsästhetic turn now in contemporary classical music. The composers will not any longer write only absolute music, but will try to create an additional layer of meaning by video or text or by a performance. And in this sense, AI aesthetics is pushing art and music once again into Gehaltsästhetik. Thank you.
My question is, I'm Yannis Zanos. My name is Yannis Zanos.
Yes.
My question is, what is the role of concept as separate from form? As an example, in your theory, as an example, you showed a painting by Braque.
Yes.
These cubist paintings have been identified as being inspired by the then trend for fourth dimension research, the hypercube ideas, and on the one hand, on the other hand, also by the influence of X-ray photography. And when we appreciate these forms, part of our appreciation as humans pertaining to a culture is to understand the impact of those moments on the forms. But the way you have treated the subject, it's only about imitating the surface of the form and not the content, the concept. So that's my question.
I would say that Cubism and all isms have a specific concept which organizes the aesthetic material. And art history has been always written, at least the art history in the 20th century, when somebody invented for the first time such a new concept and created such a new ism. That's why we have this art history in the museums, or music history, because somebody came up with a new concept which organized the aesthetic material. So that is my...
Maybe it's a misunderstanding. I was referring to the background concept that inspired the work, which is not visible in the form, except if we know about it. So the question is, what is the role of understanding the concept behind the work in the aesthetic appreciation as separate to the form that we see, uninformed?
Okay. It has to do with the perspective, how to look at an artwork and on a work of music. I think one consequence of this Gehaltsästhetik term is that you have to make your concepts explicit in order to understand or to experience the meaning of an artwork. And that has to do that in our postmodern culture, we do not share a common sense, a common culture. So we do not have the same consensus of understanding and meaning. And that's why it is important that the artists makes the concept explicit, and the concept in this way you can understand like a framework, and it's like a lens which you have to use in order to get the full pleasure of an artwork or the full meaning of an artwork.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I agree completely that the saturation of the work on the material is a major driving force in the evolution of musical style. But on the other hand, from the, not immediate, but from the post-war period, one has many examples of composers who, recognizing the need to develop new forms of tension within their work, have a very prominent discursive element without which it's impossible to really understand what's going on. It can be from apparently abstract pieces like even Fernie Howe's Time and Motion studies from the 70s, which are very technical but do relate precisely to a social context as well. Luigi Nono's pieces, obviously in many cases, Bernd Alois Zimmermann, etc., etc. So in a sense, I wonder whether the turn to the Gehalt aesthetic, which I agree completely is the determining factor in this shift of paradigm, I wonder whether it's really dependent on the technological dimension of digital technologies, or whether it's a reaction to the need to somehow connect to issues and and just connect to people's understanding and relationship with the music, which was lost and could not continue forever as the evolution of material towards an ever more let's say, expanded notion in and of itself. So is the technology really the issue, or has the technology enhanced this process?
Yes, that's both. That one is let's say, a negative reason and a positive, a negative force and a positive force or reason. So the exhaustion of the material progress and material is, of course, inconvenient for composers. At least the new generation of composers does not really know how to deal with such a situation because they only repeat what the teachers already did. The second aspect is, you're absolutely right, all musique concrète instrumentale has a background philosophy. Usually it is, especially with Lehmann, it is a negative utopia. So there was a worldview behind that. So the critique of the aesthetic apparatus, so of the classical music system, was in the same way a critique of society as such. And of course this understanding also disappeared with postmodernism in a way. That so you have there are two reasons which push the music history forward in the 20th century. But there was a third factor, and that is new music was highly institutionalized because you have been so heavily dependent from the institutions to get a performance, because a performance is so expensive to have to pay all the musicians. And only with the technology, and that is the third aspect in a way, you have such a disruptive force that young composers could do things which have and put online, and then they have been picked up by the institutions. So the table turned in a way because of technology.
Thank you for the talk. A short question on ethics, on using artificial intelligence. You mentioned multiple times that methods like neural networks are implemented for artificial intelligence, and these usually require lots of data for deep learning algorithms. So people usually, scientists usually use public available data for implementing these algorithms. So my question is, what happens when, in our times, a big part of private data is in hands of big tech corporations, like Google, which has our email correspondence, or Facebook, which holds our private preferences on which pieces we like or not. And could they use it, could they take advantage of it or exploit it on implementing the next aesthetics? There's a paradox right now that universities and institutions use public available data for their deep learning algorithms, and big corporations, we know that they use our private data, which is much more valuable to implement deep learning algorithms. Could they use their knowledge on what we like, what is our preference on art, so they could create maybe the next piece of art that we like, we will enjoy?
Okay, first, the programmers of IVA used classical music, this 30,000 sheet, because they were publicly available. And the second point, in principle, you are right. Who has the data can create, can shape the taste. They know the taste of the people, and they can shape it, and they can provide people with new aesthetic styles, for instance. They can use it for film music or advertisement and so much. The other thing is, nevertheless, the reception habits of people become very independent. So the technology enables people also to create their own taste profiles, very individualistic. And I think that is a development which goes in contrary to this intention, let's say, to this, let's say it's Google. So people will not care about such things. They will more follow their own taste, and they have the possibility to use the internet in order to get that music and that artwork what fits personally well to them. So, two forces, I would say.
Thank you, Harry.
Yes, what? You have to come up.
Thanks for the talk. I found the Van Gogh example very interesting. In fact, there is an iPhone app that it's called AI Portraits. You can take a selfie and you can immediately turn it into any sort of style, from Da Vinci to Van Gogh. And okay, this intrusion, let's say, or development of AI, speaking with researchers in the field, is expected by 2050 to generate most of commercial music exclusively. I'm told that people...
2050?
Like, yeah. But
so late?
Yeah, it's expected that it will be perfected, and all music shared on platforms like Spotify and so on will be exclusively AI generated. Yeah. So my question, simple as it might sound, is AI generated music art, no matter how well it is imitated, or is art only a human phenomenon?
In a way, I didn't directly answer on that question, but my thesis give in a way an answer. So I think the notion of art changes too, and art with this Gehaltssysthetic turn, art will become more and more conceptualized, because you can recreate any style in music and maybe in creating pictures. But what you not can do is to have the right idea, the right semantic additional. So I think what will happen that, like in pop music, you have text. So people can have a special message and write by the help of AI, maybe text and perform. That is fine. I don't think that it is possible to very soon, at least, yeah, I don't expect this general artificial intelligence very soon, if at all. And as long it doesn't exist, it is always possible to work with concepts, with meaning, with content, and to make art which cannot be copied or generated by an AI system.
Thank you.
I think we really need to move forward. We're already running an hour late. It's the last day. So thank you, Harry.
Second to last talk on this conference on the phenomenology of computer-aided improvisation and the constitution of the virtual music subject, given by Assistant Professor Dr. Iakovos Steinhauer from the University of Athens.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation, Anastasia. I have no picture. Understanding computer-aided musical improvising as the ability to continuously anticipate and adapt others' musical movements in order to spontaneously coordinate their own actions with a computer as a co-performer, producing the unforeseen, or composing in the moment novel musical expressions. The focus of this paper is on the old but still actual term of mimesis. It is a mimesis between the human and the machine, where the human player acts by filling his limited body in interaction with a potential limitless computer subject. There is a mutual imitation in which the computer is constituted as a subject through mimetic appropriation of the musical skills of the human improviser, while the musician, even in a sense of sublimity, weakens his subjectivity to imitate, in a specific meaning of the term, the infinite potential of the computer. As the philosopher Peter Paul Verbeek notices, we should not see interaction as interaction between two fixed objects. The humans and technologies are not two poles between which there is an interaction. Rather, they are the result of this interaction. In Verbeek's term, technologies help shape human experiences and practices. Rather than being external to human beings, they help define what it means to be human. Technologies help us develop our knowledge of the world, our moral actions and decisions, and even our metaphysical and religious frameworks. According to Verbeek, this paper is about the intermediate character of mimesis as a motor of musical processes that overcome the individual subject of the musician in order to create an open musical virtual body, an event of becoming, a constant reorganization of responsibilities and functions between the human and the machine. According to Killian Thomas, jazz musician and associate professor at the University of Arizona School of Music, who has built a system capable of musical improvising with a human player called Musica. The goal of his efforts is to build an autonomous self-learning system in a mimetic approach to human learning processes. In the context of a musical improviser, in the context of a musical improviser, autonomy would be associated with musical subjectivity and intention with a much larger learning capacity. Thomas said, I quote, "A human musician also builds a knowledge base by practicing and by listening and by learning and studying. So the thing we are proposing to do is analogous to the way of human learns, but eventually it will be able to do this on a much larger scale. It can scour thousands of transcriptions instead of dozens or hundreds." The ontological status of the improvising musician in relation to the intelligent computer seems to be more complicated. I argue that while improvising and listening to the musical processes emerging from the collaboration between human and machine, one can participate in a specific liberating process of mimetic transcendence related but fundamentally different from the common improvisation. Focusing on the musical improvisation in general as a real-time unfolding, not pre-established process, we think of a responsive corporeal practice that highlights intersubjectivity and calls into question the separation of self and other. Challenging Enlightenment concepts of the separate, freestanding individual and the host of binaries that serve to establish the separation between mind and body, improvisation poses a deep threat to this tradition. It is well known that improvisation, which privileges the spontaneous, embodied performer and acts of performance over objective scores, has been increasingly went unnoticed from the Western music theory and aesthetics. Improvisation underscores impermanence, randomness, and corporeality, and therefore is a radical departure from the traditional thought that favors permanence, the self-contained individual, and objective through. Pardon. Although the aesthetical idea of liberation from pre-established compositional decisions behind improvisation had a big impact in the composition, especially in the 20th century, as we know. Edgar Varèse's idea of the corporealization of the intelligence that is in sounds, but more obvious in Cage's main contribution to liberate music from human subjectivity, opened a door to a different appreciation of music. The method of chance operations allowed the composer to circumvent his subjective preferences and habits in order to make space for acoustic connections that belong neither to him nor to anyone else, an impersonal individual music. The concept of silence, it also to be understood in this sense, not the absence of sound, which Cage claimed, was impossible, but the space of a deliberate sound that opens our ears to the free sound molecules. Although the idea behind his compositional thought was similar to the liberating process of improvisation, Cage rejected this form of music. The main goal of his compositional concept, namely the absence of composer's intentionality in the work of music, the liberating of immanent musical processes, emerging from forces ruled by the eternal laws of the material itself, obviously could not be reached for him through improvisation. the idea of giving up control to the sounds themselves was incompatible with the practices of improvisation, where the embodied interaction of musical gesturing and perceiving others' musical intentions cannot be really free from individual habits and preoccupations. Improvisation is a practice that dissolves boundaries of self and other in order to eliminate the self, but the embodied, expressive, and individual character of this music is directed against general axioms of a cosmic rationality and order, obviously important principles for Cage. On the contrary, strategies like chance operations within the context of the main idea of indeterminacy express a basic distrust of the self, but not through focusing on the body, but by the need for some other dominant force to keep it in line, and universal reason who governs the body. Music for Cage should be governed by a plane of transcendence and should be based on hidden principles that limits the music from outside, controlling the immanent musical processes. I quote Cage, "Chains operations are a means of locating a single one among a multiplicity of answers and at the same time of freeing the ego from its taste and memory, its concern for profit and power, of silencing the ego so that the rest of the world has a chance to enter into the ego's own experience, whether that be inside or outside." Rather than putting our attention directly onto another, Cage felt that this attention must be mediated and sanctioned by something superior that will make decisions for us. This other is an abstract entity, chance, not other humans being with whom we interact by paying attention to their words and sounds. Despite his desire to remove himself and his likes and dislikes, Cage believed in an older concept of the unified individual exercising free will. In order to achieve freedom, an individual should remain autonomous by resisting the power of others through the help of one external superior entity. If one directs the attention back to the computer improvisation, then a similar problem can also be observed here. In terms of finding the most effective fitness function for a genetic algorithm system for the generation of jazz melodies, the programmers George Papadopoulos and Geraint Wiggins of the Department of Artificial Intelligence at the University of Edinburgh explain, I quote, "We introduced the idea of using an objective fitness function as opposed to the interactive approaches often used elsewhere in the GA music field. The reason for this is that we have a particular interest in understanding the searching behavior of our GA. We are interested in simulating human behavior and not just in the quality of our results. In order to understand the search patterns produced by our system, it is important to have a fitness function which is consistent and whose criteria we fully understand. This could not be the case with an interactive GA because of the subjectivity of the human listener. It would be impossible to determine which choices were made because of emergent behavior of the system and which were made because of the inconsistencies of the human judge." End of the quoting. The aim to build algorithms relying on formalized and temporally structured objects points to an aspect within computer improvisation similar to Cage thoughts, namely the demand for an objective, rational order that stands outside the idiomatic structure of human improvisation and thereby provides a clear view of the fundamental structures of improvisation in order to construct an adequate improvisational system. according to Adorno, it's a little bit provocative to speak in a symposium about improvisation about Adorno, but okay. According to Adorno, only the anesthetic objectivity, a reflection of the nature by itself, can express the clear subjective teleological elementary moment of art. This alone makes the works of art similar to nature. I quote, "By contrast, all particular similarity is accidental, usually alien to art as a human activity. The sense of necessity of a work of art is just another word for such objectivity." Adorno envisages a new relationship between subject and object. Mimesis as conforming to the limitless, not surveyable order refers to a physical bodily adaptation to the sphere of objects, a transformation that takes over the mimetic art of magic. Mimesis has an utopian quality for Adorno because it transcends the division between subject and object, which cannot exceed conceptual cognition. It takes account of the fact that the subject with his body is always already involved in the sphere of what is to be known, and that he can only depart from it artificially and violently. Although in order for mimesis to become knowledge, the corrective correlate of rationality is needed, which preserves the necessary conceptual distance against an empty bodily attachment to the object. Mimesis, as the process of clinging to the objects, takes on a special meaning in the 20th century. Here the upper hand takes over another, perhaps we might say, mathematical economical aspect of imitation, where standardization and automatization replace primitive mimetic processes. The development of technology leads to the automation and mechanization not only of the working processes, but also of one's own thinking and creation, by transforming them into blind standardized sequences of events. In this situation, the dialectic between body and rationality, which constitutes the essence of every work of art, disappears. On the contrary, rational processes can only aesthetically succeed through a mimesis of the rational, but only as an expression of the rationality of his own nature structure. The rationality of self-learning computer based on subjective experience could, according to our thesis, be able to do this. The musician here does not act mimetically towards an abstract rational counterpart, but faces a computer that has appropriated its own subjective improvisational behavior. By recognizing himself in the system, the musician overcomes passive mimesis. Art, according to Adorno again, is imitation not of creation, but of the act of creation itself. In order to be able to imitate the natural beauty of itself, art must structurally conform to the principle of created but interdeterminable nature. Computational music improvisation allows the human musician to participate to a process where the act of music improvisation speaks on its own. The musician appears to be not in the state of rest or imposed passivity, but in a contract with a medium which promises to mimic the essential structures of improvisation. The computer-assisted improvisation allows the subject of the musician to position himself in front of an object to which he can adhere by mimesis and can bring about the division he has gained. The computer-assisted improvisation acquires a new philosophical place as a process of self-criticism and self-correction of the practice of improvisation itself, where the improvisational act has the ability to interact with an object, or more precise, with a virtual subject. Improvisation don't reflect the rules of an objective structure, does not imitate it externally. It communicates with a virtual, but through the play of the musician, each time updatable, limitless subject, exploring the fundamentals of improvisation. Mimesis, as the most important medium of learning, is here present again. For a moment, in this act, the abyss between subject and object closes, and not only the musician subject, but also the computer object change. It takes place a self-correction of the rational objective structure of the computer, which importantly does not leave the terrain of rationality. The rationality of the computer is now not opposed to the logic musical kinesthesis, but it self-critically leans back on its own history to correct this dominion and reflects his involvement in the control of the human subjectivity. Musical improvisation can be now regarded as a performance that at the same time is an act of cognition, that is not only restricted to music, but one that extends to the essential structures of the subject. To turn subjective, intimate experience into objective, virtual, subjective accounts. The computer-musician interaction is supposed to enable the articulation of what remains implicit in musical improvisation, which is the target embodied knowledge that is at play during musical improvisation. CA improvisation is a move from subjectivity to the limitless power of a virtual entity, is a vehicle for achieving the Deleuzian organless body. Deleuze, the philosopher, is concerned with constructing a new ontology where the entities actually exist as virtual potentiality, fixed form as mobile particles, homogeneous and hierarchical structures as dynamic effects, intensities, rapidities. The improvisation body without organs is the virtual realm of the actual body of the musician, the realm of the elementary particles and forces that liberates the improviser from his habitual body. To become an organless improvisation body is to destratify the individual organized body through the computer system, to unite it with a non-personal, superhuman matter that shapes and opens it to new connections beyond the limited amount of the habitual actions of his mental and body memory. If one does it, one transforms the body from a given entity with a specific functionality and direction of action to a construction site of liberating processes of exploration and connection. As Antonin Artaud, the inventor of the term of body without organs, says, I quote, "If you have made him a body without organs, you will have freed him from all his automatisms and restored to him his true and everlasting freedom." Thank you.
Thank you, Iakovos. Do we have any questions?
Thank you for your talk. It's not exactly a question. It's a remark about your talk and other talks. Human beings are deep learning a lot of things, but not only musical data. We are fed by a lot of things. Social context, cultural context, political context, souvlaki et levkokrasi, a lot of things. But when, with machine, we only put musical data into the system, I think it's a big limit.
Yes.
No.
It's really true, yes. I can only agree with that. Souvlaki is also important, of course.
It's very important. And there are a lot of links between music and other forms of arts. I remember a talk a few years ago by an ethnomusicologist who is Peruvian, Rosalia Martinez, talking about the links between music and the tapestry in Peru, the forms, etc. And when we feed computers with only musical data, I think it lacks a lot of things.
Mm. Yeah.
My name is Kalantzopoulos. I'm a composer. I don't belong to this community in a direct way. But a lot of what I have heard has provoked a lot of little notes here in a little, in a way of reacting. So there is a question, and of course your talk about mimesis of course, has a lot to do with the same process that an old-fashioned composer applies to himself in order to arrive at a certain point. In other words, no composer that does not belong to this particular time, century in time, would write this kind of music if he had lived in a different area. So, although we like to fancy ourselves as being sometimes very talented or very genius, there's a lot of food, like the previous gentleman said, that we are being fed by our time and by our experiences. Now, one element that really terrifies me is because I do work with computers, is that I never allow myself the computer to feel that it's the boss. I don't like that. Even if it's faster, even if it has greater memory, I always want to be the boss. And because during our times, I feel that there's a kind of sanctification in technology, in the same way that saints were a certain absolute, not quality, but axia. Value. So an element I want to put in my question is this. When we play live, rather, ourselves are liquid. There are people that make us feel funny, that make us feel clever or stupid or sexy or whatever. So in the same way, when I play my music to certain people, I use them as mirrors, and I take back from them a certain reaction. Sometimes, for certain people, my music seems more interesting than others, and it has to do with a lot, with character, with relationships, and knowledge, like you said before, our common background or not. In that sense, when we play live, we have distinguished the audiences of Saturday from other days. We consider Saturday audiences stupid. They are more sort of, let's go out for Saturday night fever and be more sort of extrovert or whatever, and they're not listening. Saturday audiences are not good. Friday and Sunday audiences are best. So in that sense, and my question is this, how do you implement in a process of improvising music and the element of error that is so important, of course. Like Brian Eno said, the best things come out of shit. So how do you implement the audience's role in the ego or all the wrong things that we musicians do like to have? A beautiful girl that is in the audience, or somebody that really makes the difference of a great phrase or a great playing or a completely out of context playing, something that you could never imagine you'd have done, just because you're so inspired by a certain face. Thank you.
It's not a question to me. It's a
question.
A general question.
No, it's a question to you in the sense of how do you implement.
No, please.
How to implement the element of audience.
You have to ask composers or programmers, but not philosophers.
Okay,
the error, yes.
I rest my case.
Any programmers in the audience? No?
Wow.
Thank you. And thank you, Iakovos, for the nice talk.
Thank you.
So the last talk of the day on improvising with awkwardness by Associate Professor Dr. Danae Stefanou from the Aristotle University of Thessaloniki. Oops.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for your patience. It's been a long 3 days, but very productive. 4 days actually, but very productive ones. And thanks to everyone for inviting me here as well. I ended up over the last day taking out an awful lot of material because I realized this paper was going to be incredibly packed and messy, and then I realized it's still packed and messy, so apologies about that. I'll try to be as comprehensive as I can without overloading you too much. So, to start, a little tip of the hat tribute because, George Lewis included my picture in his talk on the first day of the conference, so I'm kind of returning the favor. Thanks for that. These ideas that I'm going to talk about today started evolving in 2012 during this other conference that was mentioned in the beginning of this one called Across the Great Divide, Human-Machine Improvisations. That was a very, very fruitful conference. And at the time, I was very much concerned with why and how mechanistic metaphors have been implemented throughout the 20th century to describe human processes. So I was kind of looking at various sort of political and ideological reasons behind all that. Can you hear me? Because I'm moving back and forth. Okay. So at the time, I kind of took a little bit of a skeptical U-turn that I think some participants also thought was a little bit technophobic. I haven't moved very much from that, but I think what I'm going to be looking at today, especially since we've seen so many different takes on the relationship between improvisation and technology, is really what's happening when machines fail. I'm not going to be looking at examples of this and offering some kind of taxonomy, but I am going to be focusing on some particular notions and seeing how these can be used to interpret the way we as machines work when we improvise and what that tells us about the context that we're in. So at the same time that this other conference was happening, this is in Greek, so I don't expect you to read it unless you are Greek or speak Greek, but I'm going to give a little summaries. At the same time as we were sitting around with the participants in the other conference and talking about human-machine improvisations, we had a guest in the house, which was Jack Wright, this amazing saxophonist who has written quite extensively on improvisation, but in a less institutional context. And he was playing with a collective in Greece, in a space that no longer exists, as is the case with many other spaces that no longer exist in Greece since 2013. It was a kind of DIY sort of space, and it was focusing on experimental music and improvisation. And we had all played together in this big collective formation. This was a review that came out literally just a few days after the conference, and the playing did happen during the few days of the Across the Great Divide conference. And what really captured my attention in that review was the words that the reviewer used. He was talking about this not really being music, at least in a way that he could identify. He was very unsettled about that. And he was unsettled about this not being music because it felt like instead of having some kind of common meeting point and some kind of common cause, much like the people walking together that we saw in the keynote today, it felt more like 8 rather awkward individualities playing together. Now, the word for awkward in Greek, the word that this reviewer used, was amíchanes. That comes from this, this particular term, amíchania or amekania, and that's a term that I'm going to be talking about today. So you've seen awkwardness in your titles, but really the term that I'm going to be concerned with is amekania. It's a feminine noun. It literally, in modern translation, translates as awkwardness, but it's actually demachination. It's something that happens when the mechanical means that we have in our disposal somehow fail. So this is basically adapted from various sides of Greek, Wikipedia, thesaurus, and etymological dictionaries. In ancient Greek, it used to refer to failure to acquire material resources, to paucity of means, basically, and the powerlessness that this brought about. In modern Greek, it has 2 variations of meaning. It's failure to behave or react in a suitable way, so you don't behave as expected. Or you are unable to say or do what is appropriate, right? So you're kind of out of context in a way. You're not delivering in the way that you should be. And also it refers to this feeling. This is from a, say, subject point of view. The other is from an object point of view. So from a subject point of view, you're feeling confused or unsettled because something sudden or unpredictable happened and it kind of changed your course of events, right? So this is a term, and I'm going to be returning to this slide at the end of my talk. This is a little bit more information from a kind of curious database that someone is putting on in Australia, of all places, which is called the Theoi Gods, Greek Mythology Project, looking at the way these terms are kind of surfacing in ancient Greek and classical literature. So Amekania was actually like a deity. It was a kind of negative goddess. She was the personified spirit of helplessness and want, a close companion to poverty and beggary, penia and ptochia. Amekania was virtually identical to aporia. That's an interesting word for those of us interested in post-structuralist philosophy. Powerlessness, says the current term. And the term appears in Alcaeus and Herodotus. We're going to return to Herodotus's definition a little bit later to see what we can make of that. So that's the context of the term I'm going to be talking about today. Of course, I'm not, predictably enough, the first to be talking about this term. The term has been used negatively by various theorists in the 20th century, particularly, though, in the last few years by Peter Weibel, who is not exactly just a theorist, but a conceptual artist of great status. So Peter Weibel has repeatedly referred to amekania as basically this state of infancy in a psychoanalytic sense that people are at before they start embracing the necessary technologies to move on. So he sees technology and mechanics as an enhancer of human ability or a compensation for lacking natural abilities. And therefore, he says, technology in itself is actually just nature, humanized by humans. So technology is human-made nature. Let's stick to that definition, because in a way, we are making a kind of second nature through technology. That's not a very original term, and it doesn't have positive or negative connotations in itself. But then Weibel recently goes on to explain that basically amechania, or amechania, as I've been pronouncing it so far, is really just the root of all media theories, or could be considered the root of all media theories. He actually references Michel Serres to say that Serres has a kind of critical take on the way that media has become a kind of new system of organs that subsequently our sensory mechanisms have become externalized. And the way that Serres sees that, when we have started using hammers, for instance, it's almost like we have substituted our fists for hammers. Serres sees something critical in that, in the sense that he suggests that we lose the fist because we use the hammer. Weibel thinks that this isn't a negative turn at all. Weibel suggests that man, as a human being, is something that reaches for something other than himself. The pronouns are not entirely neutral here, and I'm going to return to that in a little bit. Man supplemented the fist with a hammer because it wasn't strong enough. So in a way, powerlessness for Weibel occurs when we cannot have the means, the mechanical means, to extend ourselves towards the direction that we're reaching towards. Now, there's another reading of all this, of course, and it comes from, the discourse analysis that we can run through various scientific discourses. First of all, this idea that Weibel is referencing through Michel Serres is much more ancient in origin. It does come, you could say, even from the time of, the first considerations of what extension of manhood could be, in a way. And yes, this is an extension. It's, if we regard mechanical means as a way of describing human life, then we can find this as early as Thomas Hobbes, and I don't want to go too much back in time. But this paradigm, the paradigm that suggests that if something can give emotion to an entire body, then that's in itself an organism, is in itself indicative of a particular discursive process. So I'd like to turn to another kind of paradigm, a paradigm that does come from feminist theory, and from the idea that what might be more interesting in terms of looking at the extensions that mechanisms give us is the discourses that they enabled us to create. And then amechania could be a way of unpacking these discourses, of looking at what happens when the nooks and crannies kind of fail. So just to read this quote from Donna Haraway, which again comes from a slightly older publication, organisms emerge from a discursive process. Biology is a discourse, not the living word itself, right? So again, we have created technology, but we have also created notions of nature. Humans are not the only actors in the construction of the entities of any scientific discourse. Machines, that is, delicates that can produce surprises, and that's an interesting reading of machinistic metaphors by Haraway. Machines are there to produce surprises, and other partners, so anything that could be considered an object but not necessarily an agent, are active constructors of natural scientific objects. Once we speak of natural scientific objects, then the palette kind of broadens a little bit. Haraway speaks of natural technical objects embedded in matrices of practical culture and cultural practice. This could include a whole array of things, not just improvising software, but, this. And, of course, other than this, it could also include aspects of how we behave in everyday life. So I'm going to refer to two examples here where technology in a way fails, but what interests me in these situations, it's not so much the technology itself or what we can do to fix it, but what kind of contexts emerge by this failure. This is Thomas Ankersmit. This is a musician who has kind of shifted in the last few years from his saxophone improvisation practice to playing with modular synthesizer. Thanks to Stegi, in fact, and a partnership that is kind of long-lasting, I found myself with Yannis Kotsonis, who is here in the audience, playing at Irtijal Festival in Beirut in Lebanon earlier this year in the spring. Thomas Ankersmit was there as part of the program, and as part of a marathon, in fact, where various solo improvisers would play in a large space, kind of following one another. Ankersmit was playing for a good 12 to 15 minutes and building up a sheer wall of sound through his Serge modular synthesizer. it became clear that there was an awful amount of climax happening during this performance, and everyone was very, very focused in listening to this kind of situation. Ankersmit himself was very, very focused in maintaining and sustaining and building up this structure that he had built, taking on board, of course, the certain elements of uncertainty that come with analog media. And then the unthinkable happened, or maybe the not so unthinkable. The power was cut. We were in Beirut. Apparently, this happens 3 times a day. Power gets cut all the time. Generators switch on, but then again, the generator cannot sustain such an amount of power. So, in fact, for a good 5 or 6 minutes, the lights went off, the music stopped, and the climax came to this abrupt end. Now, Ankersmit could have finished the performance there. In fact, it would have been a kind of bravado ending. Everyone clapped, everyone whistled in approval. But the performance did not stop. Everyone went out, they got their beers, they discussed what is happening, they got into a situational conversation about the political circumstances and the corruption that has allowed the electrical system to fail. And then Ankersmit started again, building up from scratch, pretty much, starting from a single tone and then building up once again to reach a second climax that maybe didn't sound as good as the first climax. Clearly, if you listen to the climax the second time round, you might have thought, it was a little bit formless. This is his take on what happened. I remember, he says, the power cut happened at the moment where I was building up the sound to many layers, a kind of wall of sound. The power somewhat predictably failed at the loudest, most cathartic part in my performance that night. So the cut came at a dramatic moment, in a way, a crash at full speed, rather than while going slow. The challenge, once they'd fixed it, was how to build back up again from that crescendo. I basically climbed back up again slowly, turning up my oscillators and other synthesizers' voices one by one, and kind of resculpting the complexity again. Why was it predictable to Ankersmit that this could happen? Because he has played there before. So all he did was take on board the context that he was playing in. The choice not to stop, the choice not to say, I will not play that venue because the power is unstable, is a choice that suggests that amekania is not a paucity of means, but something that we dialogically engage with. We engage with how much power we can have in a different setting, knowing that power might get the best of us, in this case, quite literally and metaphorically, power in the sense of electricity. There are cases when similar situations happen where the decision not to stop doesn't have to do with a failure of machinery, but with this idea that has been again and again riffed at this conference, knowing how to end, and perhaps changing your idea of how to end when your co-players are doing something else. A little while later, again at Stegi, AMM, the historic free improvisation group, played Tectonics Festival. It was a very, very controversial kind of experience. For the final 10 minutes or so of the performance, only 2 of the 3 players were playing together, holding a drone, almost as if one of them let it go, the whole ensemble might die. At the end of this drone, which could have been a very good ending, a 5-minute silence was introduced. It was a silence that was definitely awkward on the part of the audience, but it was also kept almost like an aspect of the sound making. The result, well, was kind of something like this. Much like the kind of review that I discussed earlier, awkwardness doesn't really go down with the way we perceive concerts. But what changed in that situation? Silence could have been interrupted by either members of the audience or members of the ensemble. But members of the audience did interrupt in some ways. They left en masse. Many members of the audience left the premises, yet the silence on the part of the performers was kept, almost suggesting that there's something to be discovered there. There's a space that needs to be explored, a space that is not massively recognized. It's not a common space, but it's a space that dialogically defined nonetheless. Now, in 1909, E.M. Forster wrote a kind of crazy science fiction novel called The Machine Stops. if you ever get around to reading it, it's actually very short, but it's eerily prophetic in terms of various of the technologies that form part of our everyday nexus of living nowadays. So there's technologies like Skype involved, there's people communicating with each other through telecommunication technology. Everyone lives indoors because the climate is unbearable for humans, but no one knows that there is an outdoors, apart from a group of people that is not a collective. They are basically outcasts, and they are the homeless. They're the ones that have dared to question the very fabric of society that the machine is actually building. I will refer a little bit to the book, simply because, oddly enough, the main protagonist of the book is a musicologist, a female music lecturer who gives massively open online courses in a 1909 version from her room. She lives in a hotel. She presses button to get everything done, including running hot baths and listening to music. Her son is going crazy. And what does that mean? In a kind of Plato's cave metaphor, he's starting to realize that there is something outdoors. There is an outdoors. And that the machine, the very premise of everyone's livelihood, is actually stopping. How does the protagonist's son know that the machine is stopping? He can hear buzzes every now and then. Things don't seem to work as they would. But most importantly, he has once caught a glimpse of people living outdoors. He realizes that there is such a thing as life in the great outdoors, which is not so great in the 1909 horror science fiction versions of it. When the machine stops, people are not really realizing that it is stopping. In fact, they think that this is preposterous. The first glimpse that the female protagonist has of the situation being a real issue is that the music is all wrong. She's pressing the button, but something doesn't quite fit. There are hums and there are buzzes and there are, most importantly, silences. So in fact, when there are silences involved, she's able to glimpse at something other than the comfortable ambient environment that she is in. She can hear noise. She can, in fact, hear the sounds of the indoor spaces that she's inhabiting. At that point, she realizes that something is seriously wrong, but it is too late. The machine eventually stops, and everyone is destroyed. Forster's idea of a machine stopping is, as many commentators have, of course, talked about, an idea of capitalism reaching a different kind of stage in its development. In a way, prophetically, Forster saw something in what theorists like General Drounig would actually talk machinic capitalism and what it could actually achieve within the next 100 years or so. What it also points at is an idea of what happens when the concepts that we take for granted are not considered as completely naturalized, but we are able, through cases where machinery fails, to see that these concepts are actually made up by many different, plural, multiple concepts. I won't go on too much about that because, as I said, I don't want to mess things up too much, but this is a process that I would refer to as conceptual disintegration. It comes from theories that have already been addressed in this conference in previous days. It comes from the theory of conceptual integration or conceptual blending. And the idea that we are able, as advanced, evolved human beings, to blend elements from different, diverse, seemingly non-compatible spaces that only have structural similarities to form bigger, new conceptual entities. Examples have been provided in previous papers, so I'm not going to go too much on about examples. But what interests me in this notion is that, in fact, if we are going to assume agency over this process of conceptual integration, we also need to be able to disintegrate, to unpack what has already been blended, to look at metaphors as well as interfaces and look at what constitutes them, and then decide whether we are going to actually look at the gaps between a mechanism rather than the mechanism as a unified object. In short, to be able to look at Gestalt not only as something that is bigger than the sum of its parts, but also something that is actually less than the sum of its parts. It has individual parts. Not all the parts are similar. They do not all occupy the same position. If we're able to do that, then we are in fact able to rebuild and recreate and reconfigure a conceptual space. Something that ideally should not only be able to, occur from a privileged point of view, but from any point of view within a conceptual equation. This is a paper that contains more information on that, so I'm going to kind of divert and just say, go read that. That's a whole special issue on conceptual blending and creative conceptual blending in music, so there's more about that on there. But for now, and to finish off this rather lengthy session, I just want to go back to Herodotus, since we are doing these kinds of references. Now, Herodotus' use of the notion of amekania, or what I would call conceptual disintegration in this context, is slightly different to the etymological definitions that we find in modern Greek. The mention of the phrase comes in the following story. Themistocles, who's a historical general who led the Greek defense against the Persians, gave the people of the small island of Andros to understand that the Athenians had come with two great gods to aid them. The Athenians were a superpower at the time. Pitho, persuasion, and anangi, necessity. And that the Andrians, the people of the small island of Andros, must therefore certainly give money in response. It is then but reasonable that Athens is great and prosperous, being blessed with serviceable gods. As for us Andrians, we are but blessed with a plentiful lack of land, and we have two unserviceable gods who never quit our island but want to dwell there forever, namely Penia, poverty, and Amichania, helplessness. Since we are in the hands of these gods, we will give no money. The power of Athens can never be stronger than our inability, and that's the original mention of this word. I would like to finish with that concept of a power that can never be stronger than an inability, and to suggest that perhaps inability is something to not only take account of, but also strive for in human-machine interactions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danae. Last chance to be on camera with all the lights on. Questions? Comments? I think everybody's speechless. Thank you, Danae. And one last round of applause to all the presenters for all 3 days, and all of you for sticking around. With that, we conclude all lectures of Improtech 2019. And I want to invite at this point one of the three general chairs, Anastasia Georgaki, on stage for final closing remarks.
So glad about these nice events, sessions, workshops, concerts of Improtech. And before I end this workshop, and thank all my collaborators, first of all, I would like to invite Gerard Sayag and Marc Semillet from IRCAM, who are the main inspirators of this Improtech. And thank you very much that you have brought Improtech 2019 in Athens. And we hope that in the future you will come again with a more rich curriculum vitae and more progress in your improvisation techniques. And please continue.
Thank you. So, actually, I'm IRCAM, and Marc is École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales, EHESS, very famous social science school in France where Claude Lévi-Strauss was, right? Okay, so Improtech is now over, and it might be the best edition ever. It's undoubtedly one of the best editions anyway. So the hospitality and the support of the university here and Onassis Tegi and have been absolutely outstanding. They provided a very high level of dedication and professionalism. And I think personally that the lectures, the conferences, the workshops, they reached high level of multidisciplinarity and artistic achievement. And I think we really found the right balance of technology, philosophy, and ethics and aesthetics. And this is perhaps unique. I'm not sure there is another place where we can have this mixture. So it's impossible to thank everybody, all the people who have worked on this edition nominatively, but I won't. I will try anyway to mention first of all, of course, my gratitude to Anastasia and Christos, who are pardon my Greek, the demiurgoi. Is my plural, is my Greek plural correct? Because demiurgos, but in the plural, demiurgoi, the demiurge in France, who have been really the gods organizing everything in Athens. And I would like to thank all the collaborators at the university and at Stegi. So at the university, and I will ask you to make some noise for them, of course, but at the end, because I have a long list. So at the university, Areti, Andreopoulou, Giorgos, no, we will make a big ovation, because otherwise we never get to the restaurant. So Areti Andreopoulou, Giorgos Dedousis, Irene Bosinakis, Kostas Katsantonis, and all the students who are volunteers at the university and who have helped for so many things. At Stegi, Pasqua, Vorgia, Christina Pitouli, Despina Sifniadou, Lefteris Karabilis, Yanis Kritikos, and other people, like I cannot quote everybody. At IRCAM, Sylvie Benoit and José Miguel Fernandez. Jeff Joly, who is the guy who was running everywhere, taking pictures and interviews. And that's it for my list. And if I forget someone, just tell me. And in any case, we just... Okay, so as some of you might know, the timing of the Improtech editions is largely improvised. It's not a regular thing. It's been improvised until now, and we've been taking advantage of collaboration opportunities with academical or private institutions around the world. And so it has been kind of chaotic, but it is a kind of familial and artisanal organization, which is maybe adequate for this kind of mixture of philosophy, ethics, technology, etc. So, however, at every edition, we notice that there is a strong and renewed interest in these topics. So we are now reflecting on what this event should be in the future, and we are actually totally open. We don't know. Suggestions as to where it could be are multiplying, and I've heard many suggestions and even quasi-proposals to hold future Improtechs in Montreal, in Hamburg, in Budapest, in Marseille, in São Paulo, in Tokyo, just to cite a few ideas that have been expressed, with maybe possibilities, of collaboration. So we'll see. We will keep in touch with you, and we'll see what the future promises. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.
It's okay.
So, really, thank you so much for everything. And before inviting Christos Karas from Stegi, I would like, first of all, to express the very nice collaboration that we had, 3 institutions together. Very nice. No problems. No discussions about if we do it here, there, who is going to come. Excellent. For me, it was the best organization I have ever done, and in 2 different places, with all invited that were assisting here. So thank you very much, Stegi and Christos Karas, because you collaborate so well with the university and you open new possibilities and horizons for our students for the contemporary music that we don't have so much at our department. So,
well, that's it. That's what I wanted to say as well. In a sense that first of all, to go back to what Gary was saying this morning, here we have something that is more than the sum of its parts, but could not have been without the 3 of us. Very many thanks to Gérard, Marc, and all the IRCAM team with whom we have been working for many years and hope to continue working. And many thanks to Anastasia and to the university, who we've also been doing projects with for many years. So it's like, I think this was possible, the collaboration you mentioned and the smoothness was possible because it's not the first time we've worked together, maybe not all three together, but we are used to working together. So that was indeed an amazing experience. I think I'm personally very, very happy that Improtech took place in Athens, and one of the reasons why we were very happy and didn't think twice about going for this and providing whatever support we provided for the event was precisely because there is a growing interest in Greece, and not just Athens, but in Greece, about all these theoretical, technical, and musical issues. But we do not have the luck to have sort of major institutions focused on this. So very few opportunities for people living and studying in Greece to actually be able to come into personal contact with, talk to, and gain from the people being here. So I think that's essential. It's all well and good to read papers and watch videos on YouTube, but it's something different when you can actually speak to someone in the courtyard outside and develop some kind of personal understanding relationship. So I think it's super important that things like that happen in Greece, and we're delighted to be in a position to be able to make these things happen. Thanks again to everyone. I won't do the list again. Many, many people couldn't have happened without all of them. And thanks, obviously, very, very much to all the people who traveled here to speak and who traveled here to listen. And all the best to everyone for the future of their research and their creative lives. And see you all soon, I hope, again in Athens.
So just to end Improtech, again, I would like to say that technology came to us, and we have also distributed with a little bit of philosophy as Greece, because we're always critical about new technologies, the advance, because we are not inside as a state, but we try to follow this really very speedy revolution of technology that our students don't know. For example, now I think that in the future, they will include everywhere AI and music production, AI and music performance, in order to understand where are they going, and that in Greece maybe we don't have this feedback. So thank you very much. I would like very much to thank Areti Andreopoulou, our assistant professor. For everything. And George Zedoussis, PhD student. He has done everything by his own. Kostas Katsadonis, our sound engineer masters. Irini Bosinaki, here. And all our students, Victor, Melina, etc. Thank you so much. Gerard, thank you so much for everything. Christos, thank you. Thank you very much, all the speakers that you came from the States, from UK, from France, and you have been here. The performers and the people that were on the workshops were very educational. I'm very glad because we had many people who have assisted in staying in the workshop and here. So I hope that in the future we're going to do more collaborations. And now we go to the restaurant near Acropolis, Spiliadis Acropolis, and after we have an archaeological walk. So in order to see the antiquities. Thank you very much.